Today on the Daily Bellringer, we're going to look at some things you may not know about the Declaration of Independence. All right, first thing you may not know about the Declaration of Independence. It was not signed on July 4th. All right, of course, we celebrate July 4th as being our Independence Day, but technically it was July 2nd that the Continental Congress voted for independence. In fact, John Adams, one of the writers of the Declaration of Independence, went home that night on July 2nd, writing in his diary that on July 2nd would be the day that Americans would celebrate forever the independence of the United States with, parties and fireworks. Well, he was off by a couple days. Actually, it was on July 4th that the Continental Congress voted to approve Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, the actual document itself. Actually, the Declaration of Independence wasn't even really signed until August 2nd, was when the founding fathers came back to Independence Hall there at Philadelphia to sign it. And in fact, you can see this picture at the bottom, or this is the famous painting by John Trumbull that's in the rotunda of our Capitol building. This scene never happened. The founding fathers actually kind of came in one by one to sign the Declaration. They did not come in together all as one. So that picture, even though it's an iconic picture in American history, never actually happened. Second thing you may not know about the Declaration of Independence is that there are multiple copies of it. All right, of course, there is the original copy that's held in the National Archives in Washington, D.C., but as soon as the Declaration was finished, that committee of five, which remember was Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, Robert Livingston, and Roger Sherman, who had been tasked with writing the Declaration, with Jefferson, of course, doing most of the work. They were tasked then to make copies of it because they needed to send copies throughout the colonies, all right? So on the evening of July 4th, they actually took the Declaration of Independence to this guy named John Dunlap, a printer there in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, who made copies. And he made, a few thousand copies that then went out across the colonies on July 5th. Now, today, there are only 26 of these copies known to still be in existence. They're known as the Dunlap broadsides. All right, and one little interesting side fact. Back in 1989, a guy in Philadelphia bought a picture at basically like a garage sale or a flea market for $4. Well, he got home and he opened up the picture frame, and inside the back of it, he found this old document that looked like it might be one of the original copies. Well, in fact, it was one of the original Dunlap broadsides. He bought it for $4. It sold at auction for $8.1 million. On July 9th, 1776, one of those Dunlap broadsides reached New York City, and George Washington, who of course was there with the Continental Army, basically waiting to see what the British were going to do once the British had amassed there off in the New York harbor. And so George Washington read a copy of the Declaration of Independence in front of City Hall there on July 9th, 1776. Well, of course, the people of New York, they were so excited about this prospect of independence that they began to basically go nuts and go running all over town, just tearing stuff up. And one of the things they tore up, you can see in the picture down here, is a statue of King George III. All right, they tore down this statue of King George III, which was made of lead. And of course, what they decided to do was melt down the statue and turn it into musket balls. And so actually, over 42,000 musket balls were made from this statue. But one little interesting thing I found here, if you look here, here is the tail of that statue. All right, at the New York Historical Society, they still have the tail of that statue that was torn down by the colonists there in New York City. Next thing you may not know about the Declaration of Independence is that it's not always been kept in Washington, D.C. Of course, it's been in various places wherever our capital was, but of course today it's kept at the National Archives. But interestingly, during World War II, it spent its time at Fort Knox in Kentucky. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, there was kind of a panic that there might be an attack on Washington, D.C. So on December 26th and 27th of 1941, the Secret Service took the Declaration of Independence by train to Louisville, Kentucky, where it was then escorted by an armored division of the U.S. Army to Fort Knox, where it stayed until 1944. So there's a few things you may not know about the Declaration of Independence. Hopefully you found some of those facts kind of interesting. And so hopefully, again, you learned something there. So I'll talk to you later. Thanks.